Hey everybody, welcome to this tutorial where we are going to be hitting the Gemini Exchange. This is an exchange where people can trade all sorts of different cryptocurrencies, and we're just going to be tapping into this exchange's free public API to pull some pricing data about various cryptocurrencies and pull that into Tableau so that you can start building your own visuals on it. So the end game here is to build something like this. Here's just a really basic visual I stitched together. This is just to demonstrate that we'll have some data in here where at the end of the day you can choose which cryptocurrency pair you're looking at. Like here's Ethereum versus the US dollar, or we could look at Bitcoin versus the US dollar, and we have this data now pulled into Tableau so you can see the history. You could change the time frame that you're looking at, and in this case I've also done a moving average on the pricing data, which is sometimes a little bit gives you a little bit smoother curve to look at. Maybe focus in on when were there local minimums or maximums. So just showing off some of those really quick benefits that you can get by pulling data into Tableau. We're not even showing off here the dashboards, so not even to mention all the other kind of hardcore analytics you could do inside of Tableau on top of this data. This is really just giving you that bare minimum, setting the bar low, and honestly the low bar is still really useful. I remember when I first started playing around with crypto, it's not always immediately straightforward how you would be able to see historical prices like this and easily navigate your various cryptocurrency pairs. So a lot of those exchanges do have this functionality, but if you're a data geek or if you're somebody who's just trying to build your own complex analysis of these currencies, let's dive into how you can get your hands on the data in this same format. So if we hop out to the API, there's a video linked in the description of this video that gets into the basics of how we hit this API. So that video, we go through the process of how we would just pull data for a single currency pair. I think we used Bitcoin versus the US dollar in that one. So in this video, we're going to step a little bit deeper, tumble a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, and we're going to pull all of the crypto pairs. So all these symbols that you see down here, we'll get data for all of those. And then instead of outputting a CSV file, as we did in that other video, we're going to go ahead and use more of Tableau's strengths. And so we're going to output a hyperfile, which is going to be more performant than a CSV and just plays better with the Tableau ecosystem in general. So the documentation for the process of working with the Hyper API, Tableau's Hyper API, is out here. If you Google Tableau Hyper, you'll land at a link that almost certainly will bring you to this documentation. We're not going to trawl through this documentation. I've already done a lot of this in a blog post, which will also be linked in the description, where we can just kind of reference this. If you wanted to, you could go through all the steps in this blog post. You're welcome to. I would actually love it if you did, but we're just going to borrow from this code that we developed in this blog post to stitch together our hyperfile. So let's get into the code a bit. You'll notice here, this looks like a laundry list of import statements in our Jupyter notebook. This is just some basic things, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on everything that we're doing. For example, the library here, built-in Python library to work with dates. Just a little habit of mine, I do use type hints and stuff. The functions that you're going to see later on in this notebook might be a little bit more verbose than how you would make your functions. It's just a habit of mine because I do use Python in my day-to-day work. And then we have the requests library, handy tool for anybody who's working with APIs. This is just the best way for you to send requests through Python. So in this case, a request would be, we ask the Gemini Exchange up here for some data about Bitcoin, for example, and it's going to send us back some information. And the middleman there in that communication is the requests library. Pandas down here is going to be our tried and true friend for dealing with data. So the JSON data that we're going to get back from the Gemini Exchange is going to be converted into a Pandas DataFrame so that we could do all sorts of cool manipulations on that data if we wanted to before finally outputting every row of that Pandas DataFrame into a Tableau Hyperfile. All right, so the Hyper API itself has a lot of things going on inside of it, so we just imported all the various things that we imported in this example. So I just went ahead and just shamelessly copied the import statements from this blog post. I don't even know if we'll need all of these, honestly, but it's just, overkill is fine in this case. You can fine-tune your own code based off this example if you'd like later on. And then I'm actually going to delete this import statement because I might save that for another video where we could actually use the REST API to publish the hyperfile. Anyways, moving right along, let's take a look at the symbols that are available to us. So this is just kind of replaying our greatest hits from the previous video. Just a little warm up here, using that requests library to get all the information at this endpoint, which if we see that this ends with symbols, this is really just fetching that information about what symbols are available on the exchange. So I like to throw this in here because we're about to define a process that gets the pricing data for all of the various symbols on the exchange. So naturally, the first step we would want to do here is figure out which symbols are on the exchange. And then if you use this data regularly, like maybe once a week or something, or every day you're pulling these prices so you can do some analysis, or maybe you even build an automated process to do that, this is a good thing to do to actually ask the exchange for which symbols are available. This is much better than writing your own hard-coded list because who knows, maybe next week Gemini Exchange adds a new symbol to the exchange. You don't want to have to manually add that or update your list. You could just pull that information directly from the exchange. So that's why we're doing it here, and we just verify quickly what is or what are some of these symbols that we pulled from the exchange, so we can see that that's working as expected. And let's get into some of these functions that I wrote just to store the pricing data and then give us a Pandas data frame that we can spit out into a Tableau hyperfile. So this getCandlesDF function is one that we pretty much defined in the previous video, once again linked in the description. But just to recap here, this is going to be taking some JSON data that we pass to this function, and it's going to be converting all of that data into a Pandas data frame, which gives us a nicer way to manipulate that data and to easily output it, easily cycle through all of the different rows in that data if we need to, and also gives us a way to kind of just pack it into a format that you're much more familiar with if you're used to working with tables or spreadsheets or whatever. It's a more intuitive way to deal with data than just a JSON object for most people. Okay, so what this is doing is we define some columns. So the data that gets returned to us from the exchange is going to have a timestamp. It's going to have an opening price, a high price, low price, close price, and volume. And if you have no idea where I came up with this, that other video just demonstrates if you were to look at the public APIs, there is this candles endpoint, and this is what we're using to stitch together that pricing data. So we can see down here the various columns or the various pieces of information that get returned to us from the exchange. So this is just a little bit of processing down here. We add this time column, which is the timestamp that they return to us, but converted into an actual date. So timestamps are a lot of times integers that come back to you from servers, and those can be converted using libraries like Python's datetime library into actual timestamps. So I don't want to work with an integer that's telling me the number of seconds since like 1973 or something, I want to actually have a date so I can say, oh, this is January 5th, 2020. So that's why we do this conversion. Now moving down below, this is really the big value that the Python code's adding for us in this example. So this is going to be the thing that cycles through every one of the symbols that we pulled from the Gemini Exchange, and it's going to say, all right, for each symbol that we have, let's go ahead and issue a GET request that's stitched together based off the information we've defined up here, such as what is the base URL for the Gemini Exchange API, what is the API version, what time frame are we looking at. So since we have 1 day defined here, that means that every timestamp we get for Bitcoin, for example, we're going to get just one price for each day. So you could change this if you wanted to. It could be 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes. It is going to depend on the time frames that are allowed in the REST API reference. So if you want to change your time frame, I'll leave that as an exercise to you to peruse that documentation and see what are the valid time frames you could use. So we're using 1 day in this case, and we define an empty data frame here so that we can append data to this data frame as we roll through each symbol. So now as we go through each symbol, we're saying, let's get a response from the server, and then we're going to pass the JSON data from that response into that getCandlesDF function that we defined up here. So this is what's going to give us all of our nice formatted information, turn the integer timestamp into an actual date that we can play around with in Tableau, and then we'll just do that whole song and dance again for each symbol in our list of symbols that we pulled. All right, then there is this last thing here. I am defining a new column that didn't exist in the data that's returned to us from the server, and this is just us saying, hey, which symbol are we using here? Now that's going to be what allows us to, in Tableau, actually say, oh, we have a price here for January 24th, 2021. Well, which currency was it? So when we get our data returned from the server, each time that we're querying one of these symbols, the server doesn't return to us which symbol we're looking at. It figures that we already know which symbol we're looking at because that's part of the URL that we pass when we're getting that data from the server. So this is just a little bit of magic we sprinkle in on our end just to keep track of which symbols data are we working with. Now we append all of that data to this crypto prices DF, so this crypto prices data frame that we defined up here. So before we enter the loop, the for loop down here, this is empty, and then as we go through each symbol, we're just appending that data. And at the end, we have a data frame that's filled with all the pricing history for the last 120 days, I think, is the default, and for all of the currencies on the exchange. All right, so after that long-winded explanation there, just went into the weeds on that to make sure that anybody who's not as experienced with Python or with getting data from APIs doesn't get lost. Hopefully that helps you understand what's happening here. And if we go ahead and define all of these functions and then run this process, we can see that what the for loop is doing, it's going through each of those symbols, and we can see it's saying fetching pricing data for crypto symbol XYZ, whichever one it's doing it for. So this is going to take a little bit, and should only be maybe another 10 seconds or so. There we go, it just finished, and now we can just inspect what's inside of that resulting data frame, and we can see we have our time. And instead of it being an integer timestamp, it is successfully converted here into what date. We have an opening price, a high price, low price, closing price, volume, and symbol. Just to confirm that we got all of our symbols, we can just inspect the data frame here and look at the symbol column and then get the unique values. And we can see that it's not just Bitcoin, as this little subset of data would suggest. It is in fact storing data for all of those symbols. All right, so that does it for the fetching of the data, and now we get into outputting this data into a hyperfile. So in the previous video, we would have just used the Pandas API to spit out a CSV, but now we're going to get a little bit fancier, spit out data into a hyperfile, and this is going to basically be a copy and paste from this blog post once again. The blog post is linked in the description, and I'm just going to use the data frame that we defined earlier in the notebook as the data frame that we're iterating through. So each row of that data frame is now going to become a row in the hyperfile, and the hyperfile is going to get saved to this location. So I define this variable here, and now let's take a look at the details, steps 1, 2, and 3 as detailed here. If you want to know more about this, go ahead and read that blog post. Feel free to crack open the documentation for the Hyper API and read through that. This is pretty much a shameless copy and paste, not only from the blog post, but the blog post also copied this from a little tutorial demo that you could find in this documentation. So there's nothing new under the sun, just revamping other examples to make this come to life. So we do define over here the table, as it's called, for the hyper extract that we're going to create. We do need to define the columns that are going to exist inside that hyperfile, and then the data type. So we have a date type, we have doubles, which are numerical data types for all of our pricing data, and then we have text defining or text type for that text that represents the crypto symbol we're looking at. Down here is where we actually go through the process after that schema is defined for how the hyperfile structure will look. We then go through our data frame, and we use this, the Pandas DataFrames have a iterRows method, which is going to iterate through all of the rows in a data frame. And what we say here is we're inserting, using this, this inserter class that's part of the Hyper API, we are inserting each row of our data frame into the hyperfile. So we can run this, and even though I already have this existing out here from running this example before recording the video, once this is done stitching together the hyperfile, we'll get this little notification here. It says the connection to the hyperfile is closed, and we now have our data stored inside the hyperfile. So let's take a look at Tableau, and we could hop into a new worksheet, and let's just connect to our hyperfile that we just generated. So I'm just going to go down to more data types, under file, and I'm already navigated to where that hyperfile is saved. So I'll just open this, and once this thing opens on my ancient MacBook here, going to be getting a new computer soon. Now we have all these columns that we pulled from the pricing information from the Gemini Exchange available to us inside of Tableau. So let's just play around with this. You can drag your time column or your time dimension up here into columns, which is going to give you, form that x-axis. We can maybe change this to be, since our data was pulled at one price per day, let's just change this to daily data. I don't know what this guy is all the way back here. That must be some one of these crypto symbols in the last 120 timestamps of it must be hanging out all the way back here. I'm going to say that's a fluke, and let's just filter our time to only consider data from the last 2 years. And let's get some pricing information in here, maybe the closing price for crypto symbol. And right now we have all symbols in the picture, so we might want to just go ahead and filter based off a single cryptocurrency. So we can make ourselves a little drop-down filter, and now we can go through and we can look at what is that pricing information for any given currency. And if you're relatively new to Tableau Desktop, it's always worth pointing out, you're not stuck with just this number, this closing price for any given day. We could also make something like a moving average, which is going to smooth out these lines a little bit. So if you're in the business of trying to find patterns in the data or something like that, or you're trying to make any sort of estimation of where the price is going, a lot of times you'll use with these with time series data having to do with like prices of an asset, like security or cryptocurrency. You might want to work with moving averages, or some people call them rolling averages, instead of just the raw price, because it's going to some degree remove the noise from the signal. So you get this kind of smoother picture of where that price was going at any given point in time. But anyways, for this video, we're not going to dive into the ins and outs of analysis itself. This is just about how you could get this data in your hands, at your fingertips, so that you can do all kinds of cool analysis with this crypto data. So have fun, dive into this, and we'll be making more videos on this subject in the near future. So thanks for tuning into this one. See you next time.